Hi, welcome back my friends. Today I'm gonna show you how I made this dress. And if you liked the video, please click like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Alrighty, so I first wanted to make this like bra cup shape, but it really didn't fit well. I think it wasn't the right fabric. So I decided to go for this more of a straight princess seam kind of shape. And here is me creating that. I first grabbed the pattern from my lemon dress and I traced that just without the buttons in the front. This is how it looked like on my first round of trying it. So I pinned it and cut it out. After sewing it together and trying it on, I realized that the seams didn't really land in the right place. As you can see here, they kind of curve towards the middle and they're supposed to go just straight across to the strap area. So I simply marked that right on my body and I transferred that to a new piece of shipping paper. And I ended up realizing that the middle part just needs to be kind of a rectangle shape and the two side parts need to be much more curved. I will show you and I will even give you measurements a little bit later. So this is how it will go, and I just seam ripped the middle piece and I cut the side pieces to the right shape and I sewed all of that back together. Here is the middle piece and the two front pieces, how they looked in the end. And here are some measurements. Be careful, they're in centimeters. And here I tried it on one last time. I figured this back was long enough because I was gonna put a tie in the back, but it ended up not being long enough at all. So I put a bigger thing in the measurements I showed you before, but you will see what I have to do later on. And then I cut all of this out of my shell fabric. I decided to use my mock-up as just a lining because it's a little bit more stable than my shell fabric. My shell fabric is like a thrifted fabric. I'm not even sure what it really is. It's just this nice purple fabric that's really flowy. I sewed all of that together and you have to cut these little slits into all the curved parts so the seams will lay nice and flat on the chest. I obviously also did that to the lining. And then I placed them right sides together, pinned them along the top, and then I sewed all the way across. And I obviously didn't put straps in the first time around. I did seam rip it later, but I already had prepared straps by cutting out a big piece, folding it in half and then folding in the edges and just top stitching the beginning and the end of the strap because I was gonna put in this little sleeve thingy you will see later on. So I just seam ripped and placed the straps where I wanted them and sewed it again from the inside. This looks just fine. I also understitched the lining because that's what's gonna make it look really nice and not show up when you wear it. So you just iron the seam allowance of the shell towards the lining and then top stitch that pretty closely onto the lining. And this is how it looks. Here you can see the stitch. Next up, I adjusted the length a little bit. I am gonna leave the entire front part open and just sew the back from the side seam to the center. And I'm also just gonna sew that together so it's nice and finished because this is not gonna be attached to the skirt. This is gonna be the closure in the back. Here you can see that this is a little bit of a tube kind of shape, and this is nice and finished. I also understitched that part. After that I realized it will not be long enough, so I had to patch this on. Definitely make it at least as long as I wrote in the little diagram before. I always try it on like after every step basically. And here you can see it is long enough, finally. I cut it really straight and I folded the edge once over and then one more time to form a tunnel for my long string to go through. I top stitched both of those down, and I also made this long strap, and then I cut off the seam allowance and I flipped it inside out with the help of a big like embroidery needle. And then I threaded it through the open tunnels in the back from top to bottom so I can tie it like so. Really great camera work, I know. You can see it perfectly. Next up, I got my sister to mark the straps in the right place, and then I just top stitched them on because honestly I couldn't be bothered to like go in there and get it out, but I tend to leave the straps for later because then they just fit a little better and you can properly place them. I also sewed over the ends of my long strap tie piece to finish them. And then I had to do a little bit of a puzzle with the rest of my fabric, but I basically would suggest you to cut out these pieces. I made the front piece a little bit less wide because it only goes to like not exactly the middle of my body, and then I also cut some really long ruffles. Well, I cut a few pieces that I had to connect later. And then I joined the front skirt piece to the back skirt piece, but I left a little bit of a gap, about like 2 centimeters or maybe 2.5 on top, to make a channel for an elastic in the back and to sew it onto the front. So I folded that over twice, made sure my elastic would fit, and here you go. I left an opening for the elastic to go in, and I also already sewed 2 basting stitches to the front part of the skirt. I just made sure to place them where the channel was so I could gather it and sew it to the front of the bodice piece, which is what I'm doing here. So I am gathering the 2 stitches to make it the same length as the open part of my front bodice. And then I put the bodice right sides together on my skirt, and I'm only gonna sew the shell to the skirt first. And I just pinned that, made sure all the ruffles would lay nicely, and then I sewed over that. Honestly, you just gotta take your time with ruffles. And this is what it looked like before I had it taken out the basting stitches. You want to do that now because later there's not going to be an option. Here is it after taking out the basting stitches, and the front looks pretty neat and fine, but in the back you can see it is still open, and this is what we are going to do next. I cut off all of the excess of the gathered pieces so there wouldn't be as much bulk, and then I folded the lining inside and placed it right on top of the stitch I did to put on the gathered part. And I actually pinned it from the outside so I would be sure to catch all of the lining with a stitch in the ditch method. I also made sure to iron it a little bit, and I just grabbed it, flipped it over, put my pin in, and did that very carefully all the way to the other side. This is what it looked like before I started sewing. And while sewing, I just made sure to look really closely and to pull the fabric just a little bit so I could get into that ditch to put my stitch. And this is what it looks like from the back. Not the very neatest, but honestly, it's pretty much fine. And because you can't get into these corners very well, I did hand stitch it a little bit. But here you can see it's invisible. It's basically an invisible stitch. So after I tried to put the elastic into my skirt and realized I had way too much fabric in the back for my elastic to handle, I cut out the piece. And then it was pretty much the perfect amount, and I top stitched the elastic in place. And here are the ruffles. I already created a hem on the bottom because that's way easier before you start ruffling. And I folded over about 2 centimeters from the top of the ruffle because I wanted to sew it to the skirt with a top stitch. Oh, I also overlocked the skirt before I did this. And I separated the skirt and the ruffles into 4 pieces, and I only really sewed the pieces at a time. I pinned a quarter and then I sewed the quarter. Like here, I'm gonna sew. This also doesn't take as many pins because I don't think I have enough. And then I took my sweet ass time to sew over every quarter. Oh, and I also cut out these sleeve pieces. This was a little bit tricky. Here you can see me cut it out this way, but I ended up making the pattern shape like this with more of a wide edge on the bottom so I could still hem it. But this curve was so intense and this fabric didn't really allow for a double fold, so I only folded it once and sewed it down. And after that I marked where it would go on my strap and I inserted it. And I just top stitched it like I did the rest of the strap. Yeah, and that's that. Here is how the skirt ties up. The back is just an elastic, which is very comfortable. And the sleeves are looking pretty cute, pretty fairy-like. The skirt is totally flowing. Oh my god, the ruffles, they're so thick and luscious. I'm trying to show you off. I'm trying to flaunt you. I'm obsessed with you, baby, I want you. I had a little bit of a picnic in my garden while posing, so enjoy the footage. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to follow my Instagram, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Yeah, I'll shout it from the rooftops. I gotta jump out of a window if you call me. Yeah, touch your name on my neck, I promise. Girl, I swear I'm obsessed. Whatever you want, girl, it's no problem. Your love's my drug and I'm obsessed with you. Yeah, your love's my drug and I'm obsessed with you. Yeah, I put our love on a billboard, so you just need to look out your window.
shut the whole city